Hello and welcome. Tonight we are discussing fertility-friendly workplaces, attitudes to assisted conception and employment. The hashtag for this event is PetFFW, and this discussion event has been made possible thanks to the generous support of Merck, which is a pharmaceutical company, and Carrot, who could perhaps be in the same category as Pet for having a name that's really obscure in relation to what you do. And so for those of you who don't know, Carrot is the leading global fertility care platform. And I'm Sarah Norcross, and I'm the director of Pet, and I'm chairing the discussion this evening. Now, juggling a career and family life has long been a struggle for people. Just today, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, has announced a childcare overhaul that could get 11 million more women into work. Hunt says that parents of children aged 9 months to 3 years old will be offered 30 hours a week of free childcare during term time, as long as both parents are working 16 hours a week. And this change is going to be phased in gradually by September 2025. Now, in preparation for the discussion this evening, I was thinking back more years than I'd like to admit to about when I was being interviewed by a panel of 4 barristers for a position as a pupil, so a trainee barrister role. And during the interview, I was asked what my plans were for having a family and how I would balance that with a demanding job at the bar and the childcare that would be needed. I can remember vividly sitting there trying to formulate an answer which would keep the opportunity open for me, but convey how unacceptable I thought the question was. Perhaps luckily for me, before I could open my mouth, a female barrister on the panel jumped in to express her outrage at the question. Said he hadn't asked that question of male candidates and that he'd probably broken the law. And then they had an argument. I didn't get the placement, but I did gain an insight into the challenges that women encounter in the workplace. You know, I was probably not 22. I hadn't really thought about having a family at that point. I don't think I didn't even have a boyfriend. So not that you need one, but yeah. So I wasn't in that sort of place at all. And you know, times and attitudes have moved on, I hope. But the fertility world takes a while, I think, to catch, has challenged sort of employment legislation. So it was only in 2014 that legislation was passed entitling parents of children born through surrogacy arrangements to get paid leave. I mean, it seems quite shocking when you think about it, because before that change came in, parents of surrogacy born children were only entitled to unpaid leave of up to 4 weeks. So they were there with a new baby and that was all they got. And they couldn't seek maternity, paternity or adoption leave or pay. And it was entirely, what they got was entirely at the employer's discretion. Whereas the surrogate, as a pregnant employee, would be entitled to up to 52 weeks of maternity leave. So you could see, there's a problem there that, fortunately, has been resolved. But what about those who need help to have a family? And how well is this problem understood by employers? How easy is it to talk about fertility issues in the workplace? I want to go back to some of my own anecdotal evidence, because this is quite a strange coincidence, really, that 5 young men, and by young I mean in their early 20s, probably a bit like me in that interview, that I know, have told me in the last year that their female boss has told them all about her fertility treatment that she's undergoing. And these blokes have very little interest in fertility treatment, despite my best endeavours to, educate them otherwise. And they work in a range of different organisations, big banks, accountancy firms, biotech. And it seems that their managers have no issue in talking to them about their problems. Now, these very nice young men are very sympathetic, but are somewhat flummoxed, I think is probably the best word to describe it, because they're not really sure what to say or how to react. I think that's why they tell me. And I guess they just don't have, there were 2 things really. They don't have the life experience of infertility, or probably anyone close to them having that potentially. And also they'd not got much experience in the workplace either. So they've got that sort of double whammy of not quite knowing what to do. But tonight we have a fantastic expert panel who may be able to help those young men and you if you're in the workplace and having conversations with people about it. And the panel will also be sharing what they're doing to improve the lot of people with fertility problems in the workplace. From training and policies to pledges and a parliamentary bill, they've got it all covered. So we have Nickie Aiken, Zeynep Gurtin, Anya, Becky Kearns and Natalie Sutherland. So it gives me great pleasure now to introduce this evening's first speaker, Nickie Aiken. Nickie is the Member of Parliament for the Cities of London and Westminster. She has proposed a law in Parliament to require employers to allow time off work for fertility treatment and has also launched a related fertility workplace pledge.
I'm delighted to be part of the panel tonight. Being involved in the fertility workplace discussions, campaigns has been a real eye-opener for me. I knew very little about fertility treatment and the issues that many, particularly women, face. I've had friends who have gone through fertility treatment, but it wasn't until a constituent of mine contacted me to tell me her story, where she was working in the city in my constituency and was going through IVF. There were complications, and the way the bank she worked for found out was because she had to have a sick note, and on the sick note it said that there was complications due to fertility treatment. And as soon as the employer got that letter, they called her in and told her she either had a choice to carry on with her fertility treatment, or she was going to be moved to basically she was going to be moved to Switzerland. So it wasn't really a choice for her. She gave up her job. She went down the route of suing them for unfair dismissal, and did an NDA, had a settlement. But it always really frustrated her that she had to do that, and she didn't want other women to go through that. So she came to me to say the law has to be changed. And as we all know, at the moment, as the law stands, you do not have the right to take paid time off work to undergo fertility treatment until the embryo is implanted. And I think that is completely wrong. I think that going through fertility treatment is tough enough as it is. It's stressful enough. And the fact that too many women and men, their partners as well, and female partners, if they're in a lesbian relationship, feel that they have to lie to their employer about their treatment, and therefore lie about why they want time off or take it as sick leave. And that, I think, does not speak well of our society. We know from a purely economic point of view that our birth rate is falling, and therefore we need more babies being born, whether it's through a natural process or whether it's through help via fertility treatment. And therefore I personally passionately believe that we need to have in law that women have the right to take paid time off leave. And I'm absolutely delighted that through this process I have been supported and learnt so much from a number of organisations, including Fertility Network UK and Fertility Matters at Work, and also the brilliant, who you'll be hearing later, Natalie Sutherland from the law firm Burgess Me Family Law. And it's these women who have, and obviously Becky's colleagues, and obviously Anya's colleagues as well, who have really taught me so much about the law as it stands, but also what people are going through without the support. So I have this private members bill going through the Commons. It's really difficult to get any private members bill through. So at the same time, in conjunction with the organisations I've mentioned, I've got a voluntary system in place, and that's called the Fertility Workplace Pledge, and that as I said, is a voluntary scheme, and we've launched it. We launched it in Parliament a few months ago. We've had the most amazing support, even from the minister who came along to the launch. We've got organisations like Aldi, NatWest, Metro Bank, Channel 4 News, Cadent Gas, UK Hospitality. We've got the House of Commons as well, Auto Trader, Co-op, Fatbase. We've got so many law firms, and I think that's because of Natalie doesn't make that makes them say they have to do it, including big firms like Withers, and then nationwide. And we're also continuing to be in discussions with other big firms. So, you know, you guys who are on this call tonight, please do lobby your employers to take part and sign up for this voluntary scheme. And the voluntary scheme is all about right to have time off work, but really it's about having a fertility policy, a company, an employer having a fertility policy where they will give line managers training, that they will have an open discussion with employees who may be going through it, and will be supporting them through it. The ultimate goal is to provide paid time off work, but it's, for me, it's a journey that employers should be starting with their employees, whether they're going through fertility treatment or not, because you never know until you start trying whether you can get pregnant. So it's even for the people who maybe don't even realize that they've got problems, that they need to. So it's very much about awareness, it's about accessible information, it's about staff training, and then it's about flexible working. And I'm really proud of this scheme, and I'm really proud of the support I've had from the ladies on the panel tonight, but also from amazing employers across the country. So do get in touch. If you want to get more information, look on my website, which is nickieaiken.org.uk. And you will see the information there, and there's a pack you can download and then you can give your employers. But you know, I will end now, Sarah, because I know that you've got a big session planned tonight, and as I said, I've got to go soon. But my plea is to say to you guys, you are not alone. Anybody undergoing fertility treatment has got to be supported. It is ridiculous that in 2023 fertility treatment is considered under workplace employment the same as cosmetic surgery. And I don't know about you, but I personally think trying to have a baby and going through that process is slightly more complicated, slightly more important than having a boob job, quite seriously. So we do need to provide women with the support that they deserve and that they need to be able to go through this quite often stressful time in their lives. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Nickie. And I can see that links to Nickie's website and to those relevant things that she mentioned in relation to the pledge and the sort of the voluntary sign up thing there is all there in the chat for people to find afterwards. So we have a few questions for you, Nickie, before you leave. So I'll just quickly put those to you. So first of all is, what evidence do you have that improving access to fertility treatment will increase the birth rate?
Well, it's called having babies increases the birth rate. So if you can improve fertility treatment and you can improve access to it, or you can improve people's experience of fertility treatment, I really firmly believe that you will hopefully maybe reduce some of the stress that is involved. And we know that you know, it hasn't got the best success rate, fertility treatment, sadly, but even having support that women may feel less stress, and that may lead to better outcomes. But we need more babies being born in this country. We have a falling birth rate, and therefore we need more births, and therefore if it's not done naturally, we need to ensure that more people can do it through help and intervention.
So we'll move on to the next one. Thanks for that, Nickie. Why does Nickie believe that a policy providing fertility treatment leave is a preferable policy to simply improving employee entitlement to time off to access healthcare appointments more generally?
Well, the thing about fertility treatment is not a protected condition, and therefore you have absolutely no rights under the law. You do have rights under the law for maternity appointments. So when you get pregnant, you have then got the right to take paid time off. But at the moment, if you are undergoing fertility treatment, until, as I said, the embryo is implanted, you have absolutely no rights. And I think that if we're going to, I think in a decent society, we will provide, particularly women. I know there's men obviously involved as well, but women go through the whole process, and I think they deserve the support and protection under the law, and why they shouldn't have to keep it secret. And I also do think it's quite grubby to expect women to undertake their injections themselves in a toilet in work. I don't think that's really a very nice message to send women who are desperately trying to get pregnant. So I think if we have it out in the open, that there is protections, then women will be treated with respect, and hopefully be able to have time in an office environment where they can go somewhere privately, not a toilet, and inject themselves. And I also think it's just important that, although it's, as I said, it's very, very difficult to get private members' bills through because of the whole parliamentary process, having this voluntary scheme that we've launched, the Fertility Workplace Pledge, an ambassador scheme, then that sends a very clear message. Again, that we don't necessarily need a law. If employers will do it themselves, great, until we can get the law through. The law basically gives women protection, but the voluntary scheme just basically gets the subject out into the open.
I have to say, because I know that the team at PET will all be thinking the same thing. The thought of injecting yourself in our toilet facilities is absolutely horrific. Apart from the fact in the winter it's absolutely perishing cold down there, so revealing any flesh whatsoever is a challenge, and certainly not to do an injection. So next question then. The policy that you're proposing in the private members bill does not ensure privacy for patients receiving paid time off work for fertility treatment. Considering the anecdote you told at the beginning, do you think privacy for fertility patients accessing paid time off also needs to be protected?
Well, I think it's up to, what I hope that the bill will do was give women the right to be able to be honest with their employer, because at the moment too many people feel that they can't be, and therefore they lie, and I think that's a dreadful situation to be in. So I think it's about respecting a woman's choice whether she wants to be private about it or not. At the moment she has to lie if she feels that her job could be at risk. So she could, under the law, if it became law, she would have the right to remain private. But then if it was discovered that she was having fertility treatment, then she couldn't be sacked. At the moment, it's a very difficult situation she can find herself in, and it ends up with NDAs and women losing their jobs.
Okay. So Finola McConville wants to know, will this include women who suffer a miscarriage?
No, it won't. This is particularly for fertility treatment itself, but there is other legislation. The SNP MP Angela Crawley is taking through a PMB, a private members bill, on that very subject, and I believe that the government is very sympathetic to it. And I mean, what's been quite interesting in the last year or so is we've had an awful lot of legislation come through, backed by the government, but private members bills, to support more women in particular in the workplace. So we've just had one through for protecting people on maternity leave from being made redundant in the first, I think it's 6 months of them coming back. You can't be made redundant if you are on maternity leave or 6 months after you come back. And I think that's, again, a progression. I think it's really, really important that women, obviously women have the burden. If you want to, I've been pregnant twice, so I know it's a burden at some points, but we do pay a price for being the gender that gives birth, and therefore it's important to protect us, because we have a unique part to play in reproduction, and therefore why should we pay any price for our careers?
There's a nice comment from somebody, well, not so nice, but a supportive comment for what you're doing, Nickie. I had to quit my job because of complications I was going through during IVF treatment. My boss never offered me an opportunity for time off during the treatment. Since then, I've been out of the market for 10 months trying to find a job. And due to the recession, the job hunting process is getting harder, not to mention the impact this has had on me mentally. Thanks, Nickie, for putting forward this motion in Parliament. Hope this will go through so as not any other woman has to suffer in their employment anymore.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, and I'm so sorry that, but sadly you're not alone, and I have been shocked at how many women have written to me over the last year or so since we've been promoting this and having similar examples of what they've gone through. And it's not just white collar jobs. It's not like the lawyers and the solicitors and the city workers. And it is women from all types of work. I had a woman write to me recently who works in a factory up in Lancashire, and she explained to her line manager that she was trying to get pregnant through fertility treatment, and it was probably better that she didn't lift boxes. And he couldn't understand why she couldn't lift boxes, because she wasn't pregnant yet. So it's very tough for women across all workplaces.
I think that observation sort of leads into the next question, Nickie, which is what will be done to support small companies to deliver this, because it's much easier for the big city company to meet these needs.
Look, I think it's very important for all companies of all sizes to be able to support this, because it's about retention. I firmly believe that if you support an employee at a time like going through fertility treatment, that they will support that company because they've supported them. And we all know how difficult it is to recruit people in all types of jobs these days. We've got 1 million job vacancies at the moment, which is an eye-watering sum. So my message has been to all companies, small, medium and large, that it will do your retention a world of good, because you are supporting people. Now, I'm not going to, I don't disagree that there will always be more of a burden on a smaller company because of the nature of the size and everything. And at the moment, this is not going to get through Parliament at the moment, so there's going to be no support. But it is about making the argument to small and medium-sized businesses about the longer term benefits for supporting somebody going through fertility. Going through any major medical intervention, I would suggest, is probably good for retention.
And then we'll just do, I think, one more question, then we'll move on to the other panelists. So does Nickie believe that any other policies should be pursued to improve access to fertility treatment? And this ties in with something which I don't normally look in the chat, but I happen to have it open, with that Francesca Stein has asked. She says, I think that we need to mention there'll still be a lot of people that won't be able to access fertility care as they need to self-fund. And even with the amazing work that you're doing with the pledge and with employers providing support, they won't be able to afford it. So we need better access to fertility care through the NHS to increase the birth rate.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. And I think it is at the moment a lottery. There's a fertility lottery via NHS Trust, and it's up to NHS Trust to decide whether they want to focus on this or not. And I know there's different policies and different trusts. Some have nothing at all. So look, I personally would like to see a lot more access via the NHS for fertility treatment, and I make that case to ministers all the time. It goes back to the economies of scale. The NHS has only got a finite budget. It has got the largest budget it's ever had, and we live in the 21st century with all the medical advancements that we have. People living longer, people living with conditions that they would have died from, and children who may never have survived. And that's got to be welcomed, but that comes with a cost. And so I understand and appreciate why NHS trusts, some of them will make certain decisions about their policy on access to fertility treatment, but I personally would like to see wider access, and I'm sure someone like Anya would have particular views on that and particular expertise in talking about that.
Zeynep is a lecturer in women's health at University College London's EGA Institute for Women's Health, and she is an affiliate lecturer at the University of Cambridge's Department of Sociology. She's a commentator on workplace attitudes to fertility treatment, and she's a member of the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much to Sarah and Pet for having this event. I think it's really timely and really important. And I think, you know, the more we have these conversations, the more we're going to normalize talking about fertility treatment and work in the same sentence. And I think it's really important that we do that. So a little bit about me, as Sarah has already introduced me. I'm a lecturer at UCL and I'm an authority member at the HFEA. But obviously, all of the views that I'm expressing here today are simply my own views. The content of this presentation is based on my research over the last 18 years with people who've gone through sort of complex fertility journeys of different kinds. And it's also to do with my more recent fertility consultancy work, where I've been working with individuals to help them map their reproductive choices and fertility journeys. And as Sarah mentioned, I've written a little bit about the pressures of juggling fertility treatment and work, and I've just put a little screenshot of a recent Guardian article there. And part of what's really driven me to get involved in this specific topic is that I also have a long history of personal experience of negotiating fertility treatment and my career, and you know, and that's something that I found very difficult. And it's really amazing that attitudes are starting to change, and all of this work is happening at the moment. But certainly, I think even 5 years ago, this sort of felt like a very, very different topic to be discussing. And I declare that I've got no conflicts of interest. So just to give you a very brief outline, it's going to be a short talk, but what I'm going to cover are 5 of the most common challenges of negotiating fertility treatment and work that people have discussed with me. 5 reasons why people don't disclose to their fertility treatment to their employers, or 5 reasons why they don't necessarily want to disclose it, even if they do end up disclosing at some point. And 5 common responses and reactions that employees receive from employers when they do disclose this issue. Just giving you a sort of a range of thoughts and findings from my work. So obviously, Nickie has already talked a little bit about this. And even if you haven't been through this experience yourself, it's very easy to imagine that there are a series of difficulties in terms of going through fertility treatment when you are at work. And, you know, as Nickie mentioned, different kinds of work have different demands, but these are some of the very common challenges that people talk about. So firstly, there are the practical aspects, and we've already touched on these. So trying to take time off work for scans and appointments, sometimes having to lie about that, trying to kind of juggle and make your day flexible in order to fit those things in, which is obviously much more difficult in some kinds of jobs than other jobs. And the practical difficulties of things like having to inject yourself with fertility drugs in workplace toilets and things like that. Then there are the emotional aspects. Trying to manage the roller coaster of emotions that go along with fertility treatment while you're at work, and trying to be professional and trying to maintain an even keel. Some people talk to me about the difficulties of making small talk with colleagues about their children and families, and how that can be particularly difficult at certain times of year. You know, interestingly, one of the times that was mentioned was World Book Day, which seems like a really innocuous day, but you know, that does tend to be a day where people talk about their children, what they've dressed their children up as. And so if you're in the midst of going through fertility treatment and feeling very sensitive about those issues, it can feel like a bit of an onslaught. And also, some people talked about wanting work to be a refuge away from fertility issues. So not quite knowing how to juggle that desire to keep work kind of as this professional separate space, but also acknowledging that you can't help but have your emotions affecting your work life as well. Then there were safety concerns, and some of the specific examples that were disclosed to me were about, for example, wanting to be extra cautious to avoid things like COVID-19 or flu or other infections during treatment, or not wanting to take part in office socials where there's alcohol involved, and not having to be in a situation of explaining why you're not drinking when everyone else is drinking, etc. So one of the women I spoke with as part of one of my research projects, she was actually a nurse going through fertility treatment during COVID-19, and she found it really difficult to know how best to approach that situation, you know, how much to disclose to her employer, because obviously she didn't really want to be doing frontline work while she was in the midst of her own fertility treatment. Then a really common thing that was mentioned by so many people is this difficulty of concentrating, particularly at certain times, perhaps during the 14-day wait between having an embryo transfer and finding out your results, or at different points during a fertility journey, particularly taxing points where you're waiting for information and things like that. People talked about a difficulty in concentrating, and really the way I kind of summarize that is by saying it's hard to put your all into work when fertility treatment demands so much of you. And I think that's something a lot of people will recognize. And then finally, many people talked about the difficulty of planning ahead and managing career progression. And that wasn't just the difficulty of planning for the cycle of treatment, when fertility treatment is so often uncertain, so often can go through delays and uncertainties. You're told your egg collection is going to be on Wednesday. Suddenly your ovaries aren't responding as well and it's Friday, but you'd already booked a meeting for Friday. You know, so there's that kind of micro difficulty of planning during your cycle, but also people talked much more generally about the difficulty of planning your career progression when you don't know if and when you're going to be pregnant. So not knowing whether you should go for a promotion because you don't know whether you're going to get pregnant, and also, you know, not wanting to focus on work so intensively, or whether you should try and go for that because maybe fertility treatment isn't going to work for another few years. So like that difficulty of knowing what you should be doing and having to negotiate career decisions in the midst of that really great uncertainty, which fertility treatment often is. So some of the reasons people don't want to tell their employers are that a really common reason, they're not sure who the best person to disclose it to, and their workplace has no clear avenues or processes in place. So should they go to their line manager and mention it as a kind of a private matter between them and their line manager? Should they go to HR? Should they go to, you know, their mental health person at work? Many workplaces, certainly until the last couple of years where we've had this amazing sort of outpouring, burgeoning of work, haven't had any clear policies in place about who people should consult and what might be the appropriate process with which to do that. Many people also felt that it was a private matter. And sort of a version of something I've heard people say over and over again is that they were really worried that this would be the tip of the iceberg, that they'd be required to disclose all sorts of things about their private life that they sort of didn't feel had any place at work. And again, that's related to this idea of there being no clear policy and no clear sort of avenue. So, for example, one single woman who was going through fertility treatment said, well, you know, I don't want to disclose it to my employer because they're suddenly then going to ask, well, I didn't even know you were in a relationship. I'm going to have to say, oh, I'm not in a relationship. They're going to say, who are you having treatment? You know, so she just sort of felt it was going to have to be this cascade of disclosure, which was just going to create more burdens. And some people were worried about insensitive comments, questions, and judgments that might follow. And they didn't want to make themselves, and they didn't want to make other people uncomfortable as either, because there wasn't a culture of talking about these issues in the workplace. Many people mentioned that they wouldn't want to disclose it to their employer because of uncertainty about the potential reactions they might receive. And I think in the example that Nickie mentioned, for example, that's a really warranted concern. If your workplace doesn't have a policy, if you're not secure, if you don't have guarantees, then you really don't know, and you're sort of at the mercy of the kindness and decency of your employer, and that really ought not to be the case. You shouldn't be adding an additional vulnerability to someone who's already in a vulnerable situation of going through a very difficult treatment. And some people said they would be afraid to be judged as being uncommitted to work or being passed up for promotions because they were going through fertility treatment. So a whole range of different reasons, really boiling down to questions around uncertainty. And then the most common responses and reactions from employers. Many people said, well, you know what, my employer has good intentions, but there's no meaningful policies. There's a lack of understanding. So, you know, my employer was nice to me, but it sort of ended there, and that's not really what I needed. Some people talked about an awkwardness and a lack of awareness and inability to offer support from the employer. Maybe the employer not knowing what would be useful or how to phrase those things. Many people felt, even when their employers were kind, that there was a pressure to act business as usual, that they were just expected to, okay, well, you've told us that now, and we've said good luck, and now just carry on and attend all of your meetings and perform just as you would otherwise. In some cases, people talked about disclosing this to their employer and then finding out, either through good intentions or perhaps not such good intentions, that the employer then made assumptions and over-decisive actions. So such as removing, one senior woman said she just found out she was removed from a travel list because she disclosed to her employer that she was having fertility treatment. She hadn't asked to be removed from a travel list, and maybe she would have, you know, there would have been dates where she wouldn't have traveled, but to find that she'd just been removed sort of also felt like a slap in the face. And then finally, there were some people who found that their employers were supportive, that they had empathy, that they were able to keep this information appropriately private, and that they could respond by offering flexible working and reasonable adjustments, like letting people work from home if that suited them, especially during their treatment cycle. But the fact that that's not everybody's experience, I think, just goes to show how much more work there is to be doing. So just to summarize very quickly, I think we all know, certainly within this community, that fertility issues affect a huge number of working age people, and that these issues affect their personal and professional lives. So we're talking about 1 in 6 heterosexual couples requiring some form of fertility treatment, and then same-sex couples and also single people who are trying to have families. So that's really quite a large minority of those trying to have children. And while great strides have been made over recent years, there's still a long way to go to establish supportive work environments across all sectors. And I think it's clear that both employees and employers stand to benefit from creating more fertility-friendly workplaces. So in a way, it's an absolutely no-lose situation for everybody to be working towards this. And that's why I'm so delighted to be part of this panel with people who are actually on the ground doing this work. And I really look forward to hearing more from Becky's and Anya's and Natalie's presentations.
Now, our next speaker is Anya Sizer, and Anya is the lead for the Fertility in the Workplace initiative at Fertility Network UK. She's also a Labour councillor for Hoxton East and Shoreditch, and she is Deputy Speaker of Hackney Council. So she's a very busy lady.
So for those of you who don't know about us, I work for a charity called Fertility Network UK. And Fertility Network is a national charity that supports people at all stages of fertility issues. So that's right from education work in universities through to supporting people just thinking about embarking on treatments and the overwhelming feelings that surround that, through to actually in treatment itself, and then through to the other side when people are either successful or not successful when going through fertility treatment, and they've either gone on to decide that actually living without children is the best option for them, or that living with children and some of the anxieties after treatment that may entail. We provide that wraparound care and support, so running things like peer support groups, webinars, loads of resources. And it was out of the national charity that we started to focus in on the workplace. And this happened a few years ago, as I'll go on and explain in a moment. But we now have a small team of us working in various organisations, and we're really committed to progressing this conversation and really supporting organisations, no matter how small or large or what kind of organisation they are, to really get to grips with how best to support their teams. And as we've just heard from the previous speaker, you know, it's more people than we might realise. It cuts across so many barriers. There's so many misunderstandings about who experiences fertility issues. And so actually a lot of the work that we do as a charity is going in and debunking some of those myths and helping people to realise this is far more common and it affects far more people, and the impact can be much bigger than people might realise. So we're really proud of the work that we're doing. There's a lot more to do, but we've come a long way with the conversation. And I wanted to start as well with putting this slide up, which is from a recent talk that we gave at a place of work. And we asked people to just write on the day some words that they associated with fertility issues. And I love a word cloud. I find them really, really helpful in terms of just framing a conversation. And these were just some of the words that came back. And I think it's a really useful snapshot of why this conversation matters. This isn't abstract. This is dealing with individuals who are trying their absolute best to navigate the real uncertainties and difficulties surrounding fertility issues, whilst still trying to carry on with work. And really, really juggling those two worlds, finding that incredibly difficult. I think for me, one of the other things that might be missing from this particular image is that actually sometimes when going through fertility issues, one of the overarching themes and emotions actually can still be hope and hopefulness, because when we're going through treatment, often there is that feeling of, you know, at least we're doing something and activity. And for some people, there is that concept of hope as well. But I think this is quite a useful snapshot. And certainly when we're talking about infertility and the process of fertility issues going on, maybe over many, many years, these words, these phrases, these emotions are really, really helpful at helping us to step back and just think actually why this conversation matters so much, and why the work that Nickie's doing and the other people on the panel really, really matters. So a little bit about the history of fertility in the workplace. It began back in 2015 with our work with Unison up in Scotland. Unison contacted us and said they really wanted to push through a motion with all of their branches throughout Scotland that recognised fertility issues as a medical condition in the workplace. And to some of us on the call who've been very involved with this for a long time, and for those of us who are involved with the fertility sector, this can feel really quite an obvious statement. But actually, one of the big things that we have to debunk when we go in to speak to many places of work is we need to move away from seeing fertility issues as a lifestyle choice and something that people are choosing to go through, to actually starting to realise that this is a medical journey. And even according to the World Health Organization, infertility being seen as a disease of the reproductive system. So we really need to give it that focus. And within the workplace, Unison were spot on and absolutely right to say that it is so important that we give it that focus and that framing. So really wonderful news. They passed the motion through all of Scotland, and all councils adopted this focus of the medical necessity of framing fertility issues. We started then to work on creating a package of support for companies and organisations, and this then sort of ticked away for a few years, until I think the work around menopause and the focus on mental health really started to push this conversation to the forefront of people's realizations within the workforce. And I would say now, and I think many of the panelists would agree, this is perhaps one of the biggest workplace conversations at the moment, and we're only just at the tip of the iceberg of what we can do and where we can go with this. But it's a really positive time as we see more and more organisations waking up to this. And I do think it's come off the back of, as I said, menopause and mental health. So fast forward to now, we've been working with about 100 organisations, to name a few: BP, HSBC, Auto Trader and the Co-op. In different ways. Sometimes we'll go in and deliver training and discuss with them about policy implementation. Other times it's co-producing work, but whatever it is, it's about listening to the organisation, helping them to realise that this needs to be discussed, and then seeing how we can move the conversation on. And our commitment to them very much as the national charity is that ongoing continuity of care. We really want to plug them into the work of the charity and all of the support that I mentioned earlier. As we've heard earlier, Nickie Aiken is doing an amazing job at pushing her private members bill through Parliament, and we've been really encouraged at the cross-party support for this. It's not just Nickie having to push this through, but loads of people now coming on board politically and within the sector to say, yes, this matters. And we're really hopeful about the bill and the pledge and all the work that she's doing. Last year, we were awarded funding by the Department of Health and Social Care to move the conversation on the next few years. And again, that's been really positive and is, I think, an indication of why this matters so much. And we've just announced a summit for fertility that's going to be coming up in the next few weeks, and which we're really happy to be discussing. Sorry, my is not moving. Oh, for some reason. Oh, brilliant. Got it. It's fine. It's stuck for some reason. So, as I said, we offer a huge range of support, but the heart of what we're doing really goes back to that word cloud earlier. It is so important that those voices are heard, that the patient voice is amplified, and then we will work with any and every organisation to see how we can best move this conversation on. So, yes, as I mentioned, we've been awarded a part, not the full funding here, of the Department of Health and Social Care funding. And so we've now got a small team of us sharing the work and going into various organisations. And the in-person summit will be happening in the next few weeks. So please do come and ask us about this. But I think for us as a charity, it very much ties in with our whole ethos and our whole perspective, which is about amplifying the patient perspective. There's many ways to do that. There's many different options in how we do that. But that's the heart of what we need to do, is give those people the voice that they so need and help organisations to support them and be part of the solution rather than working against them.
So our next speaker this evening is Becky Kearns, and Becky is from well, she's actually the co-founder, I should say, of Fertility Matters at Work. She's a patient advocate at Defining Mum, and she's a parent via egg donation.
Thank you for having me this evening. This is a topic that's very close to my heart, both as a previous patient, but also as a professional as well. So my background is in HR. I was actually in a HR role when I was diagnosed with early menopause, and I subsequently went through 5 cycles of IVF with my own eggs before going down the route of egg donation. And that was single-handedly the most difficult time of my entire career. And actually, one of the hardest things whilst I was going through treatment was managing it with work. And so I have a real passion now for trying to make this experience easier for people who are going through it in the future, but also to provide awareness and education to employers about what it means to go through this experience. So I'm one of 3 co-founders at Fertility Matters at Work. We're all 3 female co-founders, all previous patients, and my other co-founder, Claire, is also very experienced in HR as well. So we're able to look at this from a business perspective, but also an employee perspective as well. So I just wanted to start by just sharing some of the things that we are hearing on a regular basis. Now, we've started to work with some organisations, Selfridges being one of them, and I thought this quote was really, really powerful. So we often think about pregnancy and childbirth are very visible, they're often celebrated in the workplace, but fertility challenges, they tend to be invisible and silent. We also hear this quote all too often, where people who have had a really positive experience say, I was really lucky that my line manager was supportive. And what we really want to try and change is that that becomes the norm. It doesn't feel like the luck of the draw to get a supportive line manager. As Zeynep spoke about, disclosure is a very key topic when we come to this. So lots of people feel very nervous about sharing this. They don't know what the response will be. And so how can we create that culture to try and encourage people to feel safe to disclose, but also equip managers and other people within the organisation to have a better understanding of what they're going through? And just a few quotes here just to share what it would actually mean for someone who's going through this. So recognition that my medical situation is just as valid. And I know we've touched on the perception of this being more of a lifestyle choice. And I have seen a workplace policy where it has been listed alongside cosmetic surgery. It's basically said if you're going through IVF or cosmetic surgery, you will need to take annual leave or unpaid leave. And for that individual who is sat there reading that is obviously then looking at it and thinking, okay, so what I'm going through isn't recognised. It isn't seen as a valid medical condition or a medical situation that I will be required some time off for. I think this one is really powerful as well. Having support would have made the difference as to whether I stayed at the company. And we hear that all the time in terms of people leaving their jobs because they don't feel they're being supported. And finally, people are having to navigate their way through treatment. They don't know what's coming up, and there can be so many different checkpoints on this journey. And so to then have the burden of having to educate your employer or having to talk about what might happen next can be another stress for people when they're going through this. This slide gives a visual diagram of what we see as the problem. So organisations aren't recognising fertility as a life event needing support because nobody is talking to them about it. But because organisations don't recognise it as a life event needing support, employees don't feel comfortable to talk about it. And so there's this huge silence in the middle. I also want to point out here, we've spoken about the numbers, 1 in 7 individuals, 1 in 6 couples are the stats from Fertility Network UK. And also we know that this affects women, predominantly women due to the nature of treatment, but men too, who are supporting partners through treatment or maybe going through surrogacy journeys, and the LGBTQ plus community, who more and more individuals within that community are planning to have children and will need fertility treatment to do so. So it is also a factor for diversity and inclusion as well, making sure that when we're talking about fertility, we're recognising everybody's different path. So what's going on within this silent void? These are the stats from our survey back in 2020 and 2022. And what we can see is that 74% said that fertility wasn't recognised or valued by their organisation. 42% said they didn't have an idea of who to turn to for support. And I think it goes back to that lack of visibility of where do I go? Who do I speak to? What am I entitled to? 69.5% are taking sick leave during treatment. We think about absence levels. We think about that within an organisation, the impact to an organisation. And 69.5% of those people going through treatment are actually going off sick. And that's unplanned sickness absence, which is more difficult to manage than having a conversation and planning in flexible working. We also know that 36% considered leaving their jobs. I was one of them. During treatment at one point, I got to a point where I couldn't see how I could continue. And eventually I took a sideways move into a role that was outside of the succession pipeline, and I reduced my hours to 4 days a week. So it had a huge impact to my career, and I know it impacts many others. Of those we surveyed, only 1.7% had a fertility policy that met their needs. And we are seeing more and more fertility policies, but what we need to have within these policies is recognition of the many different paths to parenthood and the different levels of inclusivity that needs to be included. We did a poll at the end of last year that said that 93%, and this was all female respondents, said that this had had an impact on their career in some way. And we know, we've spoken about the impact on mental well-being. 68.4% said it had a substantial impact, and 61% didn't feel comfortable talking to their employer. So these are huge numbers in what we're talking about. So thinking about it from a business perspective, if we're looking at putting together a business case for wanting to support people through fertility treatment, obviously we know the numbers that are impacted, we know that fertility levels are on the decline, and with other factors, which means the likelihood is that more people will be having treatment in the future. It can impact employee engagement, as we've mentioned, in terms of concentration, how you're able to show up at work, and that has a huge impact for people on their performance and their confidence in doing their jobs. We've spoken about the impact on absenteeism and the fact that actually a level of planned absence that's spoken about and is able to be flexible around the needs of the individual, but the business is aware, is much easier to manage than somebody going off sick for a long period of time whilst they're going through treatment, because they feel the only option is to go off sick to hide it. We also know, and we're starting to see, that people are looking for this type of support. It can have an impact on attraction. So we did a piece of work, an external PR campaign with Zurich UK back in November, and they saw on the back of that campaign that there was a 25% increase in visits to their careers page and an 11% increase in applications following that specific campaign. And we believe there's a link there between people seeing that that employer was actually looking after their employees. They're thinking about all these different life events that they may go through. We've talked about the numbers when it comes to retention, and actually the cost of replacing good talent within organisations is so high these days that to have a long-term view and to think about supporting people through the here and now, this life event could actually really increase that loyalty and keep them in the business, with those 36% actually considering leaving their jobs. We know the gender pay gap, it still exists. And actually, as we spoke to those 93% of women who said it had an impact on their career, one of the key themes that came out was around they were having to put aside going for that promotion. They weren't considered for that promotion. They took a step down, they took a sideways move, they reduced their hours, they even left their job. And so this is actually impacting the gender pay gap as well. And also, it's really important when we think about diversity and inclusion and just general well-being of employees. This links so strongly to mental well-being that it's so important that this is considered and recognised within an organisation. And so we're asking organisations, how inclusive are you? We want them to really think about, what does your employee journey look like? So put yourself in the shoes of somebody who may have just found out that they need to go through fertility treatment to build their family. The first place that people are likely to look is for a policy or something in writing that will firstly indicate that it's something that's recognised, but secondly, give them an indication of what they need to do next and what they might be entitled to. It's also really important to have a manager support pathway in place as well. Managers have so many things to deal with. They can't be expected to know the ins and outs of every potential life event that someone might go through. But is there guidance? Is there support in place for a manager should somebody in their team come and talk to them about going through this? We also want them to think about, what family orientated support does your organisation offer? Are we thinking about preconception as well as once people are parents? Is it just mentioned in a policy? Does that mention sit within a maternity policy, for example? It can be hugely triggering for somebody who has been through loss or is going through fertility treatment to have to hunt through the maternity policy to find out just one little line at the bottom that if you're going through IVF, you're entitled to this, or you may not be entitled to anything. You need to take it within your own annual leave. Thinking about flexible working policies as well. Is it clear that people without children can take advantage of these and apply for these? I know when I reduced my own hours when I was going through treatment, I didn't want to ask the question because I felt that I'd only be asking that question once I had a child. And actually, I was having to consider this at the point where I was still trying to have a child. Also, another key thing that keeps coming up is the inclusion of terms such as intended parents, making people feel that their journey is recognised within a fertility policy. So for those undergoing surrogacy, for example, they're finding that it's not even mentioned within a policy at all. So they're left having to not only navigate a very complex path to parenthood, but then having to educate their employer about it as well. We actually had somebody very recently who was told by their employer that they would have to share their maternity leave with their surrogate, which isn't the case. And so all of these different things need to be available to help the employer to be able to support those who are going through this. And so what we're doing at Fertility Matters at Work is really trying to encourage organisations to become what we call fertility-friendly. And we have an accreditation in place that we take them through. And what we're really looking for is a cultural change and a cultural shift. And we say, obviously, policy and guidance, which has been spoken about so much tonight, is a really good foundation and starting point. But when it comes to a topic that has the same stigma and taboo that fertility does, and as we saw with menopause just a few years ago, there needs to be so much more around that. And that's things such as education and awareness raising. It's really vital to get this topic opened up within an organisation and spoken about. And we run panel events where we open up the conversation, we give a top level awareness raising, and we also encourage people within the organisation who may be comfortable to share their experiences to help bring this to life. And what we often find on the back of this is it's almost like a domino effect where people suddenly feel more comfortable to be able to talk because they see it as a topic that is recognised. They can see other people going through this. Obviously, flexibility is really, really key. And we're aware that not all organisations will be able to provide endless days off, paid leave for this experience. That's why we talk about flexibility. Are you able to allow people the time off in hours? Are they able to move their work around to allow them to attend the many appointments that can come at the beginning of that treatment? Flexibility and actually having a two-way conversation with an individual is really, really key to be able to make this work for them, but also for the business as well. And also we're encouraging organisations to offer access to internal and external support networks as well, signpost to that additional support and make sure that people have what they need. And we do this through we have a membership resource library, which has different information about all of the different paths to parenthood. We talk about policy building, we talk about different routes to parenthood, the LGBTQ+ experience, and really try to give organisations everything they need to truly understand this and to also implement some information sharing within their organisation. I mentioned we do lots of panel discussions where we come and we just open up that conversation in a sensitive way. And we also offer training for managers as well. And for others, we've also trained mental health first aiders, we've trained HR teams in really understanding what it means to go through this issue and how they can practically support somebody. And finally, we also offer consultation around policy as well. And we work with a number of different organisations who support us to bring that real specialist insight. So with a medical advisor, we have a psychological advisor who really focuses on the emotional aspect of the journey. And we work with the LGBTQ+ community as well to ensure that their experiences are shared and also included in this.
So finally, to conclude the presentations, we have Natalie Sutherland. Natalie is partner and leader of the Modern Families Department at Burgess Family Law. She's a trustee at PET and she is host of the Infertility in the City podcast.
So, as you said, I'm a family law solicitor and partner at Burgess Family Law. I'm a mum to a 7-year-old daughter, and I was 9 years qualified when I was pregnant. I wasn't a partner, but I had been advised that having a child as an associate rather than as a partner would not be great for my career. So the sense that having children ruins your career is, I think, prevalent across industries, not just the legal world. And 4 years after having my daughter, I joined Burgess as a partner. And we're a young firm where our junior solicitors are all women in their late 20s, early 30s, most in long-term relationships, some married. But when I joined, no one was talking about starting a family. And seeing myself in the junior solicitors, I just wanted to change the culture of law firms so that the lawyers of the future did not feel they had to attain a certain status before being allowed to have a baby, where that they could feel supported in their family building plans as well as their career aspirations. And added to this, 2 junior colleagues confided in me that they had PCOS and would likely struggle to conceive. So in September 21, in a partners meeting, I shared my own fertility challenges with my partners. And as well as that, confidentially, I shared the issues that our junior colleagues were facing and shared my wish that I really wanted to do something within our small firm so that these issues could be discussed openly without fear of judgment or negative repercussions. And I knew that that required the partners to lead by example, to create that safe space. And so the idea of the fertility officer was born and I was appointed. So do you need a fertility officer? I would say yes. Having a dedicated person outside of general HR is a great way of signalling to your employees that you've thought about these issues and that you want to assist the employee who may be experiencing fertility challenges. And it removes any worry on the employee's part as to who they should speak to and whether they are going to win in the line manager lottery. We've heard about this from the other speakers. And the purpose of the role is then to assist employees in being able to manage their fertility journey with their work commitments. We understand that those undergoing fertility treatment will have a period of time when they are in and out of clinics. At times they won't have a lot of notice of, and that this needs to be managed. And as Becky said, it's much better for the employer that this is managed upfront in order to cover absence if required. And being able to be open about the reason for absence is better for the employee, as they don't need to create this false diary appointments or take sick leave or annual leave in order to attend those fertility appointments. And importantly, simply by bringing this issue out into the open, it has a seismic shift on company culture. If my bosses had been talking about fertility challenges of employees and were willing to help employees on their trying to conceive journey, when I was thinking of starting my family, I likely wouldn't have been worried about taking maternity leave or what it might do to my career. So I am really proud of the changes that have happened in my firm after introducing this role. I've been able to assist employees with egg freezing procedures, navigate ectopic pregnancy and miscarriage. And we are only a small firm of 25, and it's already had a significant impact, improving the experiences of those colleagues who would likely have hidden these issues, but for the changing culture, allowing them to be open and feel safe. So fertility policies, as a natural next step, we put in place a bespoke fertility policy. And if your company doesn't have one, I would highly recommend this is put in place. And of course, this is part of the Fertility Workplace Pledge and everything that Fertility Matters at Work and Fertility Network UK are doing. So don't just assume that leave for fertility appointments would be covered under generic medical leave policies. You're not sick if you're attending fertility appointments. And so the two shouldn't be lumped together, as it's confusing for the employee. And how you draft your policy is, of course, entirely up to you. But as a minimum, I would recommend that it should name the specific person. When we call it fertility officer, Nickie calls it a fertility ambassador. It should set out clearly what is permissible in terms of leaving work to attend appointments, how to request that time off, whether it's paid or not, whether it can be taken as hours or days or half days, and whether it's a recurring allowance for however long is needed, or whether it's time limited, such as it only relates to X number of fertility treatment cycles. It should be inclusive of the various ways in which a family can be built, such as through surrogacy, adoption, donor conception, and fertility treatment, and should benefit male as well as female employees, as well as partners of those undergoing fertility treatment. And it should explain how work will be covered while they are absent, and detail whether there are any dedicated areas for administering injections. Importantly, the policy needs to be front and centre, and employees need to know that it exists and where to find it. So I would recommend having a separate bespoke baby loss policy. This should incorporate miscarriage, abortion, termination for medical reasons, ectopic pregnancy, failed IVF transfer. It should set out what time off is provided, whether it's paid or unpaid, and should consider how to support the employee when they return to work. Now, we all know fertility treatment can be meteorically expensive. It's hit and miss whether you can get covered under the NHS, and it's not usually covered by standard medical, private medical insurance policies. Lots of big companies are now offering fertility benefits as part of their employee benefits packages. And this is seen not only as benefiting the employees who gain that financial assistance, but it also benefits employers, as it's an excellent employee retention tool, as well as a tool to attract a talent from competitors. And post-pandemic, the world has changed. People are appreciating their work-life balance better than before the various lockdowns. They prioritise family more and are demanding more in terms of benefits. Millennials and Gen Z, the future of your workforce, now expect these types of benefits and seek them out when choosing where to work. So we understand, of course, that not all companies can offer monetary benefits, but they can offer assistance by way of education or concierge and coaching services. Monetary benefits can vary from full funding for several cycles to offering a capped amount or providing interest-free loans. So fertility coaching is a very specific type of coaching designed to help anyone on a trying to conceive journey. Because your fertile years coincide with your working years, the two are very much intertwined. Having a fertility coach enables the employee to navigate common challenges, such as juggling the practical, mental, and emotional pressures of trying to conceive whilst working, finding a better work-life balance, dealing with any loss in confidence, assisting with anxieties over performance, and enabling the employee to seek and accept support. And being supported on the trying to conceive journey, especially by an employer who puts in place a specific benefit fertility coaching, improves that employee's well-being, their performance, their motivation and engagement. And this in turn means that the employee performs better at work, they are likely to stay with the employer, improving retention rates, and all this improves company productivity and profitability. So I just wanted to deal with issues women face who are trying to conceive, but also thinking of moving companies. Women who are looking to move companies are terrified about asking what their firm's fertility or maternity policies are, for fear that that would hinder them getting the job. They fear they will be seen as trying to get pregnant. And whilst we have laws which prevent this kind of discrimination, I would say that asking for those policies before being offered a position is likely to be a risk most women wouldn't want to take. So leaving employment which would trigger the payback of already received benefits is also a concern for those wishing to move companies, as is the fact that new employees may not be eligible for enhanced maternity benefits or fertility benefits until they've been employed for X number of months. And when time is of the essence, as it is when you're trying to conceive, all of this impacts a woman's choice as to whether she leaves a company or joins a company. So what can or should be done? Again, it comes down to changing this taboo culture and having children, to acknowledging that your employees, be they male or female, are likely to want to have a family at some point and want to continue with their careers. Acknowledging that for women, who are the ones who carry the pregnancy, undergo the invasive fertility treatment, and will need to prioritise a period of time off to care for young children, should be supported by their employer in being able to do this if they wish and to not be judged or penalised for it. So by putting in place things like fertility funding support, enhanced maternity pay mirroring for new joiners, meeting any penalties that a new joiner might face from a previous employer, providing paid time off for fertility treatment, providing policies and benefits to interviewees as a matter of course, or having them on a website for public viewing, day one eligibility for such policies and benefits, day one eligibility for flexible working. All of these will change working practices and working culture and will directly benefit the female workforce and the bottom line in terms of retention and attraction of staff. And lastly, I just wanted to share with you Infertility in the City. So Infertility in the City started back in October 21, when Sumaya Uzani, a former lawyer and founder of Mimosa Fleur, and I shared our fertility challenges and decided we wanted to change the legal profession for women in similar circumstances. We held an in-person event in December 21, where senior women from global law firms shared their personal stories with the aim of opening up the conversation around fertility in the workplace. Our aim was to embolden the attendees to go back to their places of work and start talking about this issue, to ask their companies whether they had fertility policies or a fertility officer, and if not, to request that they be put in place. A second event followed in July 22, and I'm pleased to say that I've been contacted by many people inspired by those events to bring that change to their firms, which is absolutely incredible. And we wanted to keep the conversation going, so we launched the podcast in October 22, which I co-host with Zeynep and Emma Menzies, a fertility at work coach. We interview men and women about their fertility challenges and how this has impacted on their careers, what they needed from their employers to navigate that journey, how they asked for that support, and how employers can implement that advice for the benefit of their employees, so that we break the silence around this taboo topic and inspire new attitudes and behaviours that will improve and normalise the management of fertility challenges in professional contexts. I would, of course, encourage you all to listen. And if anyone on the Zoom call today would like to share their fertility story on the podcast, please do reach out to me.
Someone says this process can be difficult for the men involved too. More emotional than practical, perhaps, and how will they be supported in this? So I think we'll go to Becky first, and then to Anya, and then if the others want to chip in, we'll let them.
Yeah, so completely agree. I think men often overlooked in this conversation. We encourage organisations to factor in partners in this process, so they too will likely want to be there at the fertility appointments. We had one man say to us, I couldn't even have time off to be there at the conception of my own child, which when you put it in those terms is really stark. So we definitely encourage employers to focus on the male experience, but we find it really difficult to get men to speak as openly and as freely as women when it comes to this topic. But we have actually held a number of panels within organisations where we have managed to get a man come on the panel and share his experience, and the power of those stories is incredible. And we've even been in the room where one of the senior managers is kind of sat at the back, and he at the end he put his hand up, and we weren't quite sure what he was going to say, but he went back 15 years to when he went through his own experience, and nobody in the organisation even knew that he had been through that, and that just kind of opened up the door for other people. We also have, if we cannot find a man to speak, we have a male speaker that we will bring in as well, and really just to try and encourage other men to feel comfortable to talk about this, because there is that additional kind of level of stigma and taboo. But yeah, it's a really, really important part of the conversation.
Anya, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to wholeheartedly echo what Becky's just said. As a charity, we've given this a focus for many, many years. And we know that statistically about 30 to 40% of all known primary diagnosis is male factor. So there needs to be better medical focus, but there certainly needs to be better recognition and emotional focus on the male partner. And because of that, we've got a lot of focus on that in the charity. So we have Him Fertility, which is specifically for men. We run men-only support groups, and we have two incredible ambassadors, Toby Trice and Rod Gilbert, the comedian, who constantly talk about this issue and have done huge campaigning work. So as a charity overarching, this is always really, really vital. And therefore, because of that, it comes into fertility in the workplace. So we've run panels and training sessions specifically just for men. We always try and amplify the male voice on any panel that we do, and right from the start, any training, any resources would always state the reality that actually this is experienced by men, and we need to be looking at what emotional support can look like for them. It's not an add-on, it's not an afterthought. This is an absolutely vital part of the conversation, and one that's been really neglected overall. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in the workplace on this topic, but it has to start with recognition, and then what does support look like?
Natalie, I was going to bring you in actually, because there are a lot of male lawyers, and there weren't any at your meeting. And it was all women.
Well, there was one man
at
the December event, but there was loads at the July event. So we had many more men coming, and I think as women we are starting this conversation, but men don't like to talk about these things. But I think their voice is getting louder. They are part of this conversation. It is important for individuals to stand up and share their experiences, which allows allows other men to feel safe, just as we do with as women. But when I was originally sharing my story with my partners and everything, we called the role women's officer, because I'm a woman. We were talking about our female staff, and it just didn't sit right with me, because what we're talking about is people becoming parents, and fertility impacts men just as much as it impacts women. So that's why we changed it. We wanted the focus to be away from it being this women's issue that really people don't really care about, but it being an everyone issue. And our policies, even though we don't have young male solicitors at the moment, but the policies relate to you being allowed to have that time off if you're supporting your partner who might be in another firm going through the fertility treatment. So we wanted it to be as inclusive, non-gendered. So yeah, definitely men are part of the conversation.
Great. The next question I'm going to put to Zeynep first, and that is, are the potential problems associated with uncertainty around timing of conception and pregnancy problems that exist for women in work, whether or not they actually need fertility treatment to conceive?
Yeah, of course. I think to a degree that's absolutely the case. But I think for couples, women, men who are going through fertility treatment, those uncertainties are hugely exacerbated and added to as well, with having to make, adjustments in other ways. And also part of going through fertility treatment is you have to act as if you're pregnant before you're pregnant, and that can be a very long process. You could be going through multiple cycles of treatment for several years, and in some ways you have to make adjustments as if you've already become pregnant. I think somebody mentioned the case of a woman who didn't want to lift boxes, or being careful and that sort of thing. So I think it's definitely, there are added burdens and added pressures when that journey is overcomplicated by a medical problem.
Does anyone else want to come in on that, or I'll go to the next question? Right. So someone says, I have real concerns about women going through treatment who are not in professional roles. Is retention a big enough carrot? So I'm going to go to Becky first on that one.
Yeah, so I think obviously I assume you're asking in terms of the organisation, is it a big enough carrot to get the organisation to want to do this? And I think it's thinking about the big picture. Obviously, we know retention is a huge issue, talent attraction, but for roles that are kind of less professional based, it is still an issue. But also we think of productivity, we think of the absence levels that we're talking about here. It's going to impact an organisation regardless of the level in which that employee works. And so I think it's having that holistic view of, okay, let's look after the well-being of our employees, and this is a huge part of that, which will then pay back in benefits to the organisation. And I think it's the right thing to do to support people through these things as well. We shouldn't just do it for the benefit of the business. If we want to look after our people, this is a huge situation that people are having to deal with whilst they're in work, and it is causing them negative impact, and it is impacting the business as well.
Anya.
Yeah, I agree. I think retention's part of the picture, but it's about the here and now. It's not just about the carrot / stick of someone potentially leaving. It's actually about what's work life like now. We mentioned presenteeism earlier, and that sort of ability to just about manage to show up, but not really being able to engage fully. And I think that's a very, very common experience for many people. So I think that it's multifaceted. It's about retention. It's about people having the best work experience possible. I also think bottom line is there's a duty of care. As Becky just said, it's the right thing to do. Do we want to be part of the solution, or do we want to add another layer of burden to people already facing one of the biggest life challenges that they may well ever face? And work can be part of the solution. That's what's really exciting about this. Work can be part of wraparound care, support, resourcing for the individual. They don't have to be a place where the individual is battling against them, they actually can be part of their support structure. And I think that mentality shift is really vital going forward. But there is an overarching, what is work about, what is our duty of care to the individual, and how can we keep workplaces working to the best of their ability. So it's multifaceted.
Okay, Natalie, next.
I was just going to say that I think the genie's out of the bottle now. I think this conversation isn't going away. I think that fertility treatment itself is not as taboo as it was when it was 40 years ago. More and more people are creating their families this way. Together we've all started this conversation, and more people are joining it and sharing, and therefore I think it's going to be it's just going to get louder, and if you're the type of company that's ignoring it, you're going to get left behind.
Great. Okay.
Can I just add something?
Yes,
on
of
that,
course.
Sarah? Yeah. I mean, one of the things I wanted to mention also is there was a comment made earlier about, the difficulty of accessing fertility treatment for many people, and the NHS provision in the UK being quite limited. And one of the other pressures a lot of people face is, if they're going through fertility treatment, they really don't want to be in a position where they feel that their jobs are precarious or, at risk, because they do have this huge additional financial outlay. So, making people feel secure at work just in and of itself is really important for their mental health and stress levels as well. So I just wanted to add that angle in as well.
Great. Okay, we have a question from Alison, who says, excellent presentations from all. Anya mentioned the World Health Organization, which states that infertility is a disease of the male and female reproductive system, and that fertility care encompasses prevention, diagnosis, treatment. Employers should be made aware of this basic information. And Alison says, I'm greatly encouraged to see so many people involved in providing information to move away from fertility being seen as a lifestyle choice and put in the same category as cosmetic surgery. Have any of the speakers engaged with the NHS regarding the changing the policy of fertility patients having no statutory rights to time off for appointments? So I guess that's perhaps for Anya in the first instance, as to whether that's one of the, the NHS is a massive employer itself, as well as being able to perhaps lobby on behalf of patients.
Absolutely. And we're working actually with 3 hospital trusts, quite big hospital trusts, around these issues. So we're working internally with the NHS, and then as a charity for years we've campaigned around many aspects around fertility treatments, joining with Nickie Aiken's bill and focus on that. I think it's absolutely right. It's one area that we need to focus in on, and hopefully I think it's almost self-perpetuating. So the more we can have the conversations in society around this and politically, I think the more likely we'll see big organisations like the NHS engaging in this. But as many of us on the panel have alluded to, I think this real urgency in conversation is quite a recent thing. So I would hope over the next year or so that we would see places like the NHS really engaging in these kind of conversations, and absolutely that there should be statutory right for all people in all organisations for leave. So fingers crossed for Nickie Aiken's bill, but for the wider discussion.
Great. Do any of the other panelists want to come in on this one? Becky?
I think I would just say, just echo what Anya said, but we have also spoken to a number of NHS trusts, and there is a huge disparity there between different trusts as well. So I think it is about just getting that conversation out there, trying to get more and more to follow suit and kind of show those benefits. But yeah, the NHS is huge, and you think, oh, we'll make a change, but actually it's one NHS trust at a time by the looks of it at the moment. And
so it's it reflects the postcode lottery that there is perhaps to accessing treatment on the NHS, certainly in England. So yeah. Okay, right. Francesca Stein has a question. She says, so many women experience issues such as endometriosis and PCOS that can impact on their fertility. So I think we need to look at these conditions as part of our fertility in the workplace policies and support and educate on these conditions too. Zeynep, I thought I'd go to you first on this to sort of think about from your work around these issues, what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the very clear connections we see is that women who know that they're suffering from conditions that are likely to impact their fertility are keen to try to do something about it. So that might be thinking about fertility preservation and egg freezing. But it might also lead them to try to form their families earlier, perhaps, than they would ideally have wanted to do that, because they want to, they want to kind of build in a bit more of a time frame for what might be, something that will take a long time. And so in that sense, of course, it's just incredibly helpful if the kinds of policies that the other panelists have talked about are evident and obvious, and people can go along to them and know where they stand, instead of having to kind of scrabble in the dark and think about, how do I plan for a future that has uncertainty, that's possibly going to involve infertility. So I would say absolutely. I mean, open discussions about all of these issues, creating a culture shift, is really important. But then also the kind of the concrete policies in place that can make people feel secure about the options they have within their work environments are going to be super helpful, I think.
And Natalie, what about in the fertility policies that you've seen and you've probably helped create, those other issues involved in those?
So our policies will, set out definitions of things, signpost for support. We have done the Fertility Matters at Work training, and we are fertility accredited. So everybody in the firm has undergone the e-learning. So we all know way more than we did to begin with. It helps people who are not suffering these issues understand what it involves for other people, and those that it does impact know where to go for help, because obviously we're not doctors, we're lawyers, but we have a duty of care to our employees, and if they are suffering these things, what's important for me and for our firm is that they can talk about it and feel like they can share and explain, I need time off because I'm in massively pain because I've got endometriosis. That type of thing. We want to create that culture where we're looking after our employees, but importantly, signposting them to the experts.
Great. Okay. So we've got 15 minutes left and lots of questions. So right, let's go with this one from Angela Periclear Smith, who's actually, I think, had to leave, but we can fill her in. But she would like to make sure that you all to make sure that there's support in the workplace for intended parents, which you certainly was mentioned in the presentations going through surrogacy, as it's very important for them not to be missed out from policies too. And it doesn't take much imagination to see that they would be perhaps the first set of people that would be forgotten in some of these policies, because surrogacy in and of itself isn't as common as IVF. So has anyone come across anything in particularly interesting about protection for intended parents? Is that been a bit of a shock to people, or people already actually managed to think about that for themselves?
I think what we find most is that for those who are going through surrogacy, they are having to do a huge amount of work in educate, not only finding out about it themselves, but educating their employer. And we do a lot of work with my surrogacy journey and work with intended parents. And some of the stories we hear are quite shocking, actually, about how they've been told they're not entitled to the same amount of leave. It's wrapped up within the adoption policy, yet there's no mention of it being their biological child, or the fact that they're going through surrogacy. And so they felt very much left out. I actually spoke with a male recently who had a son through surrogacy, and he said he worked out there were 172 steps for him to become a father. And I thought that was really shocking, the way that he described what he had been through, and he had a really supportive employer, but they didn't have a clue. They didn't have any information out there for him. So not only was he trying to work his way through it himself, he was also trying to educate his employer too. And so it's just so important that we've got those basic things in place, that people who are going through this know that there's going to be a level of understanding. And employees can't know everything, but it can really help just to have that in place, and just to give them that security that they know it's a valid path to parenthood, because I think it almost reflects the lack of understanding in wider society as well. That these things aren't mentioned, they aren't talked about, they're not recognised. And so, yeah, I think having intended parents, it's just one of those real key things. We ask people, have you got a mention of this in your policy? And more often than not, it's no, we haven't. So hopefully that's a takeaway for tonight.
Yeah, and I think really, although my memory is failing me as to when it was introduced, but I did do some work with the Department of Health and many others on the sort of them issuing their first guidance around surrogacy. And so that's, and you know, it is relatively recent that, you know, that was the first piece of, you know, policy really that came out from Department of Health, giving surrogacy that sort of legitimacy as a form of family building from the states, even though there was sort of law in place, but there wasn't the sort of nuts and bolts about how to do it, either for patients and intended parents, surrogates and intended parents, or for medical professionals either. So obviously medical professionals also get sort of confused about what's going on there, because they don't do it that often, particularly when it comes to delivering the babies. Right, okay, so this is a question for Nickie, and I'm going to put it to Anya perhaps first, because of her other job as in politics more, and that is considering that the Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch rejected the idea that menopause should be a protected characteristic just a few weeks ago. How much hope does Aiken have, or do you have, or any of the panel have, that undergoing fertility treatment could become a protected characteristic under this current government? So, Anya.
Wow, that is putting me on the spot with my other hat on. I was really disappointed at the decision. I think it was last week. I think it was a missed trick, because so much progress is happening around menopause. So I didn't quite see why we weren't doing that. I don't feel that hopeful that it will become a protected characteristic. Perhaps not just under this government, but in general at the moment, for a variety of reasons. But what I do feel hopeful about is that we've got a shift in society, that this conversation matters. I genuinely think that. And we have to absolutely give credit to Nickie for pushing this conversation politically. So I'm not sure about it being a protected characteristic, but I am certain that we're on the crest of a wave now with this conversation. As Natalie so rightly said, you know, the genie's out of the bottle. We now have to work out how best to support people facing this. So I do actually, people say to me at the moment, what's my predominant emotion about this? And actually I feel really hopeful. I do think that we've seen a massive shift in this conversation, and this is only going to grow, and that can only be a wonderful thing for all those people that we represent here on the panel tonight. Yep,
and lots of nods from the panelists that the audience can't see. Does anyone else want to come in on the protected characteristic question, or should we move on?
I mean, I think it's not. I think, as Anya says, it's probably quite unlikely that would happen. But I think it's also, as Anya says, we're at a point now where actually, you know, the fact that the really huge changes might not be coming down the pipeline, that shouldn't deter anybody from making sort of quite small scale changes that are actually going to have a huge impact on their particular employees, on their particular organization, on the culture of their workplace. So I think, you know, sometimes when you have these conversations, people will say, yeah, but you know, what can I do? We're just a small employer. We're part of this global network. We're this, we're that. In fact, there's huge things you can do, even if you're just one branch of a global company, and it doesn't have to cost you money. There are some really specific changes you can bring in, you know, the kinds of things that Natalie's talking about, Becky's talking about, Anya's talking about, the kind of changes you can bring into your office. It doesn't even have to go through kind of global head office and have lots of money behind it. You could just kind of start talking about these issues and make them less taboo in your own office, and that would make a huge impact.
And
Okay.
I just wanted to say, sorry, that law reform obviously takes a long time. And I think what we're doing now, we're starting this conversation, and I think we just need to keep at it. So the law may not change for many years, if at all. But I think the more women and men that talk about this and be the pioneers in their own companies to change those individual cultures and organizations, politicians hopefully will just see that this is something that actually everybody deserves to have, not just the ones who are lucky enough to work in companies that understand it's an issue.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think obviously we got really excited when the private members bill was going through Parliament, and Nickie has sort of managed our expectations around this, the likelihood, as I think I was jumping far ahead at the beginning. But what the Workplace Pledge has done is almost give that route for organisations to want to do it, to voluntarily do it, rather than it being a you have to do this. It gets them to start thinking about why they might want to do it for the interests of their employees, but for themselves as employers as well. So I think it's focusing on, we've got this voluntary scheme now that people can sign up to, they can take part in, and then the more they talk about it, the more their competitors will want to follow, and the more people will pick it up. And so I definitely feel really positive about where we are. It feels like change is happening, change is coming. It may not be a blanket change of the law, but that private members bill has really started. It's always made people think more seriously about this.
And I guess as people move jobs, if they've gone from one place to that had a fertility policy, and a Natalie, as someone said, not every company has someone like Natalie, but you know, then if those people move, then they might expect to see it there, or might be inspired to become a Natalie and become the fertility officer. Sorry.
Hashtag be more Natalie.
So yes. So this leads on to another question actually, which is, so do the panelists actually think this can be achieved without a really concrete law, rather than a guide? Do you think, you know, it can all be done on a voluntary basis, or do we need that law to change? So Anya.
I think let's just get on with it. Let's roll our sleeves up and make the change. I mean, I think, as you've just said, Natalie, change happens with MPs when they see the strength of opinion outside in the real world. That's just always what happens. And so we need to all be showing that this is necessary and vital, and it's not an add-on. This is just what is needed at the moment. So yeah, I don't know whether there'll ever be a law change. I would love to think so, but I'm seeing that as a part of the movement forward. But the real movement is us, each one of us going and making that difference in our workplaces, calling for reform and getting involved.
Also,
Natalie.
we know with maternity policy, so time off for antenatal appointments and everything like that, there must have been a time when that wasn't part of the law. Yeah. So we're now adapting and changing things so that time off for fertility treatments is just as normal and just as recognised as time off for antenatal appointments. Society changes; these things just need to catch up. But the more that we talk about it, I just think change will just gradually come. And I do think the law does need to change, because there will be those pockets of employers that will say, you know, we're too small, it's just going to cost too much money, and actually, you know, they have to do it for pregnant people, so we want them to have to do it for people going through fertility treatment.
Yeah, can I just mention we have a campaign page on our website which is encouraging people to write to their MPs to get them to support the bill and to show their support within their constituency for the Fertility Workplace Pledge as well. So there are things that you can do. You can share. We encourage you to share your story if you have one, or if you know someone who's been through this, because that's how you kind of win hearts and minds when it comes to this. But we have heard from Nickie and her team that MPs have literally been stopping her in the corridor to say, we've had a letter from my constituent and I didn't even realise. And so everyone can make a difference by sending a letter, telling them why this is so important.